The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling and Associates marketing agency, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floors. I stood at the coffee station, watching the steam rise from my ceramic mug, hand-thrown. Pottery from a local artisan, a small rebellion against the corporate aesthetic that had slowly crept into our once creative space. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The aroma of freshly ground beans mixed with the faint scent of the lavender diffuser I'd placed near the reception area years ago. Through the glass partition, I could see the creative department, a carefully orchestrated chaos of mood boards, color swatches, and campaign sketches scattered across standing desks. A notification chimed on the nearest monitor. Our biggest clients. Holiday campaign had just received approval. The Meridian Hotels account, worth $3 million annually, a relationship I'd nurtured from a cold call 7 years ago when they were just a boutique chain with 5 properties. My fingers traced the rim of my coffee cup, a habit formed during countless early mornings spent building this agency from the ground up. The weight of those years settled comfortably on my shoulders. Late nights crafting pitches, weekend brainstorming sessions that stretched until dawn. The gradual transformation from a scrappy startup to Phoenix's most sought-after creative agency. The elevator chimed, its polished steel doors sliding open with a whisper. Vivian Cross emerged, her stilettos clicking against the concrete with military precision. She wore power-like armor, a tailored charcoal blazer, perfectly coiffed auburn hair, and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they surveyed. She was the new chief executive officer, hired by our board of directors 3 months ago. A corporate strategist from New York with an MBA from Wharton and a reputation for optimizing underperforming creative agencies. Her resume boasted successful turnarounds at 3 different firms, each emerging leaner, more profitable, and utterly stripped of their original character. Her gaze swept the open workspace like a general surveying territory to be conquered, then settled on me with the cold assessment of someone identifying dead weight. "Elena," she said, my name clipped short in her Manhattan accent. "My office, now." The coffee turned bitter on my tongue. I set the mug down carefully, aware that several of my colleagues had noticed the summons. Maya, from account management, glanced up from her computer, worry flickering across her features. David, our art director, paused his conversation mid-sentence. I followed Vivian across the polished floor, past the collaborative spaces I'd designed to foster creativity, past the living wall of succulence that had become the agency's unofficial trademark. Her office occupied the corner I'd once used as our primary conference room, now transformed into a sterile command center with imported furniture and motivational quotes printed in sans serif fonts. The door clicked shut behind us, with the finality of a trap closing. Vivian settled behind her glass desk, a manila folder positioned precisely in the center like evidence in a trial. My name was typed on the tab in corporate standard font. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the chair positioned deliberately lower than her own, a psychological tactic I recognized from business school textbooks. I remained standing, my hands clasped loosely at my sides. The silence stretched between us while she opened the folder with the practiced ceremony. Inside, I glimpsed my employee file, performance reviews, and what appeared to be a termination document already prepared with today's date. "Elena, I've spent considerable time reviewing your position here at Sterling and Associates. While I acknowledge your historical contributions to this agency, I've identified several concerning patterns in your approach to client relations and creative direction." Her voice carried the rehearsed quality of someone who had delivered similar speeches before. I could almost see the bullet points she'd memorized. Employee shows resistance to change, lacks adaptability to modern marketing strategies, represents old-school thinking that hinders growth potential. "You've been with this company for 8 years?" she continued, consulting the file though we both knew she'd memorized every detail. That's a significant tenure, but in today's rapidly evolving marketing landscape, we need fresh perspectives. Young talent who understand digital engagement, social media dynamics, and data-driven campaign strategies. Through the office window, I could see the creative team gathered around Jake's desk, probably reviewing the mock-ups for the Meridian campaign. Jake, 24 years old and brilliant at TikTok marketing, but who still asked me for guidance on client psychology and brand storytelling fundamentals. The truth is, Elena, this industry has moved beyond traditional relationship building and intuitive creative processes. We need analytics specialists, conversion optimizers, and growth hackers who can deliver measurable ROI. Fresh blood with current certifications and contemporary skill sets. She paused, allowing her words to sink in like poison through my system. I'd heard variations of this speech before, at industry conferences, in trade publications, from consultants who promised to revolutionize agencies by discarding everything that made them human. I'm restructuring the entire creative department around emerging talent and modern methodologies. Your position, while historically significant, no longer aligns with our strategic direction. I'm afraid we'll need to part ways. The folder crackled as she withdrew a document, the termination agreement, complete with a modest severance package and a non-compete clause that would effectively exile me from the Phoenix marketing scene for 2 years. You'll receive 6 weeks severance, full benefits through the end of next month, and of course, glowing references for future endeavors. I'm sure you'll find opportunities better suited to your traditional approach to marketing. I let her finish, my expression neutral while memories cascaded through my mind. The night I'd mortgaged my condo to keep the agency afloat during the 2018 recession. The weekend I'd spent in Meridian's flagship hotel, drinking wine with their CEO and sketching campaign ideas on cocktail napkins. The slowly growing portfolio of stocks I'd accumulated through the employee ownership program I'd helped establish. When she slid the termination document across the glass surface, I glanced at it briefly before meeting her eyes. I understand, I said simply. When would you like this transition to be completed? Her eyebrows rose slightly. She'd clearly expected resistance, emotional arguments, or desperate negotiation attempts. Instead, I reached across the desk and signed the document. With the pen she offered, my signature flowing smoothly across the corporate letterhead. I appreciate your professionalism, she said, though she seemed almost disappointed by the lack of drama. Your access card will be deactivated at 5 p.m. today. Please coordinate with HR regarding the transition of your client relationships. Stood, smoothing my dress, and extended my hand. Thank you for your clarity, Vivian. I wish you the best with the restructuring. Her handshake was brief, professional, and completely unaware that she'd just made the most expensive mistake of her career. I spent my last day at Sterling & Associates moving through familiar routines with the detached calm of someone watching their own funeral. At my desk, soon to be someone else's workspace, I archived files, forwarded important client communications, and deleted the personal folders that contained 8 years of institutional knowledge. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Maya approached during the afternoon lull, her usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. Elena, what the hell is happening? Vivian just announced you're leaving, effective immediately. I continued sorting through my desk drawer, placing my backup hard drive and personal notebooks into a small cardboard box. Career transition, I said simply. Time for fresh blood, apparently. That's bullshit, Maya whispered fiercely. You built half our client relationships. The Meridian account worships you. What's Vivian thinking? Through the glass partition, I could see our new CEO in animated conversation with Jake and 2 recently hired digital specialists, all under 30, all armed with impressive LinkedIn profiles and zero understanding of the delicate ecosystem I'd spent years cultivating. She's thinking about quarterly reports and growth metrics, I replied, taping the box closed. Can't argue with the logic. Maya's face flushed with indignation. Logic? Elena, you are Sterling and Associates. We all know Richard only started this place because you convinced him to leave the corporate agency. You've been the creative heart of this company since day one. She wasn't wrong. Richard Sterling, our founder and majority stakeholder, had indeed launched the agency after I'd presented him with a business plan over drinks at a downtown gastropub. But Richard had been hands-off for the past 3 years, focusing on his real estate investments while trusting the board to handle operational decisions. Things change, I said, lifting the box and tucking it under my arm. Vivian has impressive credentials and a clear vision for the future. I walked toward the elevator, past colleagues who offered awkward waves and sympathetic smiles. The creative department felt different already. Less collaborative energy, more isolated focus on individual tasks. The living wall of succulence seemed to droop slightly, as if sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. At 4:47 p.m., I swiped my access card one final time and stepped into the Phoenix heat. The desert sun hit my face like a benediction, and for the first time in months, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to dissolve. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from Carlos, our head of client services. Just heard about your departure. This is insane. Call me tonight? I silenced the notification and drove home through familiar streets, past the coffee shops where I'd held client meetings, past the print shop where we'd produced our first major campaign materials. The city looked different somehow, less like a professional obligation and more like a place where I might actually choose to live. That evening, I sat on my patio with a glass of wine and my laptop, finally opening the quarterly statement I'd been avoiding for weeks. Sterling and Associates had implemented an employee ownership program 5 years ago, a progressive profit-sharing initiative designed to retain talent and build long-term investment in the company's success. Most employees had purchased minimal shares, treating it as a glorified bonus program. But I'd seen the potential early, converting every available bonus and profit-sharing payment into equity. When my grandmother left me her inheritance 2 years ago, I'd invested the entire amount in additional company stock. The numbers on my screen confirmed what I'd calculated months ago, but hadn't bothered to verify. 38.7% ownership in Sterling and Associates marketing agency. Not quite a controlling interest, but substantial enough to demand a seat at any table, a voice in any major decision, and certainly enough to prevent any restructuring that didn't serve the company's long-term interests. I laughed, a sound that started as bitter irony and transformed into genuine amusement. Vivian had spent 3 months analyzing employee files, performance metrics, and departmental efficiency ratings, but she'd never bothered to examine the ownership structure of the company she'd been hired to optimize. My phone rang. Richard Sterling's name appeared on the screen, and I answered on the third ring. Elena. What the fuck is happening over there? His voice carried the frustrated bewilderment of someone who'd just received several angry phone calls. I've got 3 different people telling me Vivian fired you. Please tell me there's been some kind of misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said calmly. Your CEO decided the agency needed fresh blood and contemporary perspectives. I was apparently too traditional for her vision. A long pause. Then, she fired you? Jesus Christ, Elena. You own nearly 40% of the company. She can't just... Wait, does she know about your ownership stake? That's an interesting question, I replied, swirling wine in my glass while the sunset painted the desert sky in shades of amber and rose. What do you think? Oh, this is going to be fun, Richard said, and I could hear him grinning through the phone. When are you planning to enlighten our MBA genius about corporate ownership structures? I watched a roadrunner dart across my backyard, chasing something invisible through the creosote bushes. I thought I'd let her settle into her rhythm first. Give her a chance to implement those fresh perspectives. Elena, You beautiful, diabolical woman. How long are you planning to let this play out? Until she calls me, I said simply. She will. Call. They always do. 3 weeks into my unexpected sabbatical, I'd established a new routine that felt like luxury compared to my previous schedule. Morning yoga on the patio, followed by coffee and industry trade publications. Afternoon consultations with former colleagues who'd started reaching out about freelance projects. Evening walks through the desert preserve behind my neighborhood. My phone had become a source of entertainment rather than stress. Text messages arrived daily from Sterling and Associates employees, each one painting a clearer picture of the chaos Vivian had unleashed in her quest for optimization. Maya. 3 client meetings this week went completely sideways. Jake's great with Instagram metrics but has no idea how to handle pushback on creative direction. Vivian keeps saying we need to trust the data, but the clients want relationship management, not analytics reports. Carlos. Meridian Hotels postponed their spring campaign launch. Their CEO specifically asked where you were and seemed genuinely confused when I explained you'd left the agency. I think he's considering switching to our competitors. David. The new digital specialists redesigned our entire creative process around conversion optimization. Everything feels like a math problem now. Yesterday, I spent 4 hours explaining why brand emotional connection can't be measured in click-through rates. I forwarded none of these messages to Richard, though he called regularly for updates. The situation had to unfold naturally, without interference from concerned stakeholders or well-meaning interventions. Vivian needed to experience the full weight of her decisions before understanding their true cost. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was tending to my garden. Vivian's name appeared on my phone screen, and I let it ring twice before answering. Elena, she said, her voice tight with controlled frustration. I hope you're settling into your new routine. I'm calling because we've encountered some unexpected challenges with client retention, and I wondered if you might be available for short-term consulting work. I continued deadheading my roses, the phone balanced between my shoulder and ear. Consulting work? Nothing extensive, she said quickly. Just a few client meetings to smooth the transition. The Meridian relationship seems particularly delicate. They've expressed concerns about maintaining continuity with their campaign strategies. Through my kitchen window, I could see a hummingbird at the feeder, its wings beating so fast they blurred into transparency. I see. And what would this consulting arrangement entail? A pause that stretched long enough for me to hear the tension in her breathing. Hourly compensation, of course. We could discuss rates that reflect your institutional knowledge and client relationships. That's thoughtful of you, Vivian. What kind of hourly rate were you considering? Well, given the nature of the work and the temporary duration, I was thinking somewhere in the range of perhaps $75 per hour. Set down my gardening shears and walked inside, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee while she waited for my response. $75 per hour was roughly half my previous salary when calculated hourly, a number that demonstrated exactly how little she understood about the value of institutional relationships. That's an interesting offer, I said finally. But I'm afraid my consulting rate is considerably higher than that. Given the specialized nature of client relationship management and the urgency of the situation, I'd need to charge $300 per hour, with a minimum 4-hour commitment per engagement. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, $300 per hour? Elena, that seems excessive for consulting work. That's the current market rate for crisis management and client retention. Consulting, I replied calmly. Particularly when the consultant has existing relationships with the accounts in question. If you'd prefer to handle the situation internally with your fresh blood approach, I completely understand. No, she said quickly. We can work with that rate. When would you be available to meet with the Meridian team? I glanced at my calendar, completely empty except for a yoga class I'd planned to attend that evening. I could accommodate a meeting next Tuesday afternoon. Shall we say 2 o'clock? After ending the call, I sat on my patio with my coffee and allowed myself a small smile. The hourly rate I'd quoted was exactly 4 times my previous salary when calculated per hour. Not coincidentally, but as a precise measurement of the value Vivian had discarded when she'd decided I represented outdated thinking. Tuesday's meeting, with Meridian Hotels, unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Their CEO, Michael Chen, greeted me with the warmth of someone welcoming back a trusted advisor. "Elena, thank God you're here. We've been trying to work with Sterling's new team, but something feels off. The creative direction is technically sound, but it's missing the soul that made our previous campaigns so effective." I spent 2 hours rebuilding relationships that had been strained by 3 weeks of purely analytical client management. By the end of the meeting, Meridian had agreed to proceed with their spring campaign, contingent on my continued involvement as a consulting creative director. Vivian met me in the lobby afterward, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes betraying a mixture of relief and resentment. "That went well," she said. "Michael seemed much more receptive to our creative direction with your guidance." "Client relationships require cultivation," I replied. "It's not something that can be automated or optimized through metrics alone." "I'm beginning to understand that," she admitted. "Elena, I'd like to discuss the possibility of extending your consulting arrangement. We have several other accounts that might benefit from your institutional perspective." I nodded thoughtfully. "I'd be open to that discussion. Perhaps we should schedule a more comprehensive meeting to review the scope of work and establish a longer-term consulting agreement." "Excellent. How about tomorrow morning? 10 o'clock? As I drove home through the familiar Phoenix streets, I felt the peculiar satisfaction of someone who had waited patiently for vindication. Tomorrow's meeting would be interesting, but not for the reasons Vivian anticipated. That evening, I called Richard Sterling. "How did today go?" he asked immediately. "Vivian has requested a longer-term consulting arrangement. She wants to meet tomorrow to discuss terms. Are you going to tell her about the stock ownership?" I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto my patio, where the desert sunset was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "I think tomorrow might be the right time for full disclosure." "This is going to be beautiful," Richard said. "I wish I could be there to see her face." "I'll give you a complete report," I promised. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling & Associates wearing my most professional business suit and carrying a leather portfolio that contained documents Vivian had never seen. The agency buzzed with its usual creative energy, but I noticed subtle changes: less spontaneous collaboration, more isolated focus on individual metrics. Maya waved from her desk, and I caught Jake staring at me with something resembling relief. The new digital specialists looked up briefly from their screens, clearly wondering why the recently terminated employee was back in the office. Vivian's corner office had been rearranged since my last visit. The glass desk now faced the window, giving her a commanding view of the creative department. She'd added motivational artwork to the walls, abstract pieces that suggested movement and progress without committing to any specific emotional resonance. "Elena, thank you for coming in," she said, gesturing to the same deliberately lowered chair she'd used during my termination meeting. "I've given considerable thought to your consulting proposal, and I believe we can structure an arrangement that benefits everyone involved." I remained standing, opening my portfolio and withdrawing a folder that contained documents she'd never bothered to examine. "Before we discuss consulting terms, Vivian, I think there are some aspects of Sterling & Associates' corporate structure we should review." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Corporate structure? I'm not sure I understand the relevance to our consulting discussion." I placed the folder on her glass desk, the papers spreading out like evidence in a courtroom. "These are quarterly ownership reports from the employee stock program. I thought you might find them illuminating." She glanced at the documents with the dismissive attention of someone humoring an irrelevant tangent. Then her expression changed. Her eyes widened as she processed the numbers, the percentages, the implications of what she was reading. These numbers indicate that you own. Her voice trailed off as she recalculated the figures, hoping she'd misunderstood something fundamental. 38.7% of Sterling and Associates marketing agency, I confirmed. I've been participating in the employee ownership program since its inception, and I've reinvested every profit distribution and bonus payment into additional equity. The color drained from her face as the full implications crashed over her like a wave. She'd fired someone who owned more than a third of the company she'd been hired to manage. Someone who had veto power over major strategic decisions. Someone who could call for board meetings, demand financial transparency, and question every operational choice she'd made. You never mentioned, when I terminated your employment, why didn't I mention that I owned nearly 40% of the company you were restructuring? I took a seat in the chair she'd positioned for psychological advantage, but now it felt like a throne. You never asked. You were too busy explaining how fresh blood and contemporary perspectives would optimize our underperforming creative processes. She stared at the ownership documents as if they might transform into something less devastating. Elena, I had no idea about your equity position. If I'd known, obviously I would have approached the restructuring conversation differently. Would you? I asked, genuinely curious. Or would you have found different reasons to eliminate someone who represented a potential challenge to your authority? Your ownership stake doesn't change the fact that the agency needed modernization. Your approach to client relations, while historically effective, wasn't aligned with contemporary marketing strategies. I opened my portfolio, again, and withdrew another set of documents, financial reports from the past 3 weeks that Richard had provided the night before. Let's discuss those contemporary strategies, I said, spreading the reports across her desk. Client retention is down 18% since my departure. The Meridian account was preparing to terminate their contract before yesterday's meeting. Revenue projections for the next quarter have been revised downward by 12%. And 3 of your fresh blood digital specialists have already submitted formal complaints about work environment and creative constraints. Each statistic landed like a physical blow. Vivian's carefully constructed confidence crumbled as she realized that her optimization efforts had destabilized the very foundation of the agency's success. These are short-term adjustment challenges, she said weakly. Any major restructuring involves temporary disruption while new systems establish their effectiveness. Perhaps, I agreed. But as a 38% owner of this company, I have significant concerns about strategies that prioritize theoretical optimization over proven client relationships and revenue stability. The silence stretched between us while she processed the complete reversal of our power dynamic. 3 weeks ago, she'd held my termination documents like a weapon. Now I held ownership reports that gave me more authority than she'd ever possessed. "What do you want?" she asked finally, her voice stripped of its previous confidence. I gathered the documents and returned them to my portfolio with the same methodical precision she'd used when firing me. "I want Sterling and Associates to succeed," I said simply. "I want our clients to receive the innovative, relationship-focused marketing strategies that built this agency's reputation. And I want to ensure that any future restructuring decisions consider long-term sustainability rather than quarterly metrics alone. Are you asking for your position back?" I stood, smoothing my jacket, and looked out at the creative department, where my former colleagues were pretending not to watch our meeting through the glass partition. "I'm not asking for anything, Vivian. I'm informing you that as a major stakeholder in this company, I'll be taking a more active role in strategic planning and operational decisions. Whether that involves traditional employment, expanded consulting, arrangements, or formal board participation is something we'll need to discuss with Richard and the other directors." Her face had gone pale, but she managed a professional nod. "I understand. How would you like to proceed?" "I'll schedule a stakeholder meeting for next week. In the meantime, I suggest we continue the consulting arrangement we discussed, with some modifications to the scope and compensation structure. I moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to her. One more thing, Vivian. You mentioned that any developer can be replaced, that fresh blood is always superior to institutional knowledge. I'm curious. Do you still believe that applies to major stakeholders who own significant portions of the companies they help build? The question hung in the air like smoke while she struggled to formulate a response. Finally, she managed. Elena, I clearly made errors in judgment regarding your value to this organization. I'd like to find a way to move forward that acknowledges your contributions and protects the agency's interests. That sounds very reasonable, I replied. I look forward to our continued collaboration. As I walked through the agency toward the elevator, I felt the weight of 8 years of investment, relationship building, and quiet strategic thinking finally receiving its proper recognition. Maya looked up from her computer with unconcealed admiration. Jake nodded respectfully. The digital specialists watched with the nervous attention of people realizing they'd witnessed a masterclass in corporate power dynamics. The elevator doors closed, and I descended toward the parking garage with the profound satisfaction of someone who had waited patiently for justice and watched it arrive exactly on schedule. 6 months later, Sterling & Associates had found its equilibrium. Vivian remained as CEO, but with a significantly modified approach that balanced analytical optimization with relationship cultivation. The fresh blood she'd hired brought valuable technical skills to campaigns that were strategically guided by institutional knowledge and client psychology. I maintained my consulting arrangement 3 days per week, with the remaining time devoted to a boutique strategy firm I'd launched for smaller creative agencies. My income had increased by nearly 300%, but more importantly, I'd redefined my professional relationship with work itself. The agency thrived under our collaborative approach. Client retention improved, revenue targets were consistently exceeded, and the creative department rediscovered the innovative energy that had made Sterling & Associates a Phoenix landmark. Vivian and I developed a mutual respect built on clearly understood boundaries and complementary strengths. She never again made the mistake of underestimating institutional knowledge, and I never again allowed my contributions to be invisible to the people making strategic decisions. On quiet afternoons, when I sat in coffee shops reviewing campaign strategies for new clients, I sometimes reflected on the lesson that had emerged from those 3 weeks of professional exile. True power doesn't announce itself with title changes or organizational charts. It accumulates quietly through consistent investment, relationship building, and the patient construction of value that others depend upon. The best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. It's the gradual revelation that what seemed disposable was actually irreplaceable, and what appeared to be an ending was actually the beginning of something far more powerful. In the desert, the most resilient plants grow slowly and deep, surviving conditions that destroy flashier species. In business, the most valuable professionals do the same, building foundations so strong that their absence becomes impossible to ignore, and their return becomes not just welcome, but essential. The market always recognizes true value, but sometimes it takes a little patience to let that recognition unfold. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.